This person has a question. How do you fast as a diabetic? Well, that's a good question. And if you're taking diabetic meds or insulin, injecting insulin or taking insulin-type pills, you probably ought not to fast, or at least be very, very careful and do it only in cooperation with and the oversight of your doctor. There is a problem. And, before I was afflicted with diabetes and it was starting to come on me, I knew an older man that was diabetic. And he had to eat at regular times or he would, really get upset. And he'd say, I'm diabetic, I have to eat. I'm diabetic and I have to eat regularly. Now, after I had a little experience with that, I realized that's a common thought. I'm diabetic and I have to eat frequently and regularly. And the diet that has often been recommended for diabetics has been eat about 6 small meals all throughout the day and eat regularly. Well, one of the reasons for that, there's a couple of reasons why people suggest that. I don't think either one has to be legitimate, but in some cases it probably would be smart. If you're taking high-powered meds and or insulin, they can artificially drag your glucose way too low to where it gets dangerous. So you have to take your meds to keep your blood sugar up at a normal level, or those powerful meds, and that insulin is going to drive them too low. You could pass out. You could die. So yeah, in that case, I'm diabetic and I have to eat frequently would make perfect sense. But normally speaking, if you are not taking the meds and the insulin, you don't have any worries. Normally speaking, you wouldn't have any worries about it dropping too low. Your biggest concern would be for it to go too high. And you don't have to necessarily worry that, well, I've got to eat. I ate at 1 o'clock this afternoon and now it's 5 and I better eat. I'm diabetic. Well, if you're not taking meds or insulin, it shouldn't be a problem. Now, there may be individual exceptions to that, but for most, it would not be a problem. It's kind of funny because we take such high-powered meds and so much insulin that we force ourselves to eat, which provokes our blood sugar going way too high, and then it drops way too low, and then we have to eat again, and then it goes too high and too low, and it's just like a vicious cycle. So I'm not saying drop your meds. You'll have to talk to your doctor about that. And if you are taking meds or insulin, then yeah, you probably ought not to fast. You may be able to get by with a carbohydrate fast, but even that could be dangerous because you're just not getting many carbs. And your blood sugar could still go too low, even though you ate 4 eggs for breakfast. So you got to be careful when you're taking meds or insulin. When you're not, there's only one problem that I've run into or that I can see that could still cause you to have to eat frequently, and that is if you're eating high-carb meals and you've got reactive hypoglycemia like I had, whereas I would bounce way too high after eating a high-carb meal, and then I would drop way too low. My pancreas was working just fine. In fact, it was working too well. It was pouring out too much insulin for too long. So I'd eat a meal, and it would jump up to maybe 200, and then 3 or 4 hours later, it'd go down to maybe 50 or 60 or 40. And there was a time when I didn't know what was going on. And I was just snacking all the time. I can remember I would keep a piece of bread, not low-carb bread necessarily. They hardly had any you could buy in those days, but it was a piece of whole wheat bread with peanut butter on it. And I'd fold it in half and put it in a plastic bag, a sandwich bag, and I'd keep it with me. And if I would eat breakfast at 8 o'clock or 7:30, then around 10 or 10:30, I would have that bread, and that would last me till lunch, and then I'd have a snack in between lunch and dinner. And I felt like I have to do this to keep from those excessive drops. Reactive hypoglycemia is what it's called. And it's kind of rare. Most type 2 diabetics don't have that, but I sure did. And the minute I went low carb, the thing just cleared up overnight. I remember one time I was preaching at a church and I was going to have breakfast and the pastor was going to come and get me and take me to the church, and I would preach or attend Sunday school. I would preach at the main service. And then he was going to take me out to lunch. So I was going to go from 8 o'clock in the morning till maybe 1:30. You know how long pastors take to get out of church. They talk to every person that's there until they all leave. So I was going to go a long time. I was nervous. I was worried about going that long without eating. I made it. If I remember right, after the service, I knew the pastor might be talking to people for the next 45 minutes or an hour. I went into the bathroom and ate my little peanut butter and bread snack to kind of tide me over. But I was just happy I made it that far. But the minute I went low carb, problem solved. I didn't go very high. I never dropped very low. My pancreas calmed down. It was an overreactor. You know, some people overreact to everything. My pancreas was an overreactor. It was reacting to carbs like crazy. All right, here come the carbs. Pour out the insulin. Boom, boom, boom. Some people think the only hypo you can get is from injecting insulin. Well, that's the main way. But people like me, the ones that had this reactive hypoglycemia, their own pancreas creates hypos for them. And now, a lot of people, it doesn't get that bad as it was with me because I passed out one time and I felt like passing out several times. But for a lot of people, they just get kind of jittery, kind of nervous feeling, and just feeling like something's off. And if you'll test your blood sugar, you may find that it's dropping too low. You're at 75, 72, 70, 68. And, that's just not really a healthy state, especially if you're used to having your glucose high. So I wish I could today get into a time machine and go back and talk to the dentists of around the year 2000, 2001, when I was having all those extremes and didn't have a clue what was going on. I was scared to death. I had a feeling diabetes was trying to put its icy claws on my life. But I wasn't sure what to do. I wasn't sure what was happening. They would tell me, well, diabetes is when you go too high, but sometimes you're going too low. Well, how does that work? Remember, one pharmacist told me, well, maybe you're going too high and too low, and she was right about that. I wish I could get into a time machine and go back and talk to that dentist of around the year 2000 and say, Dennis, here's what's going on. You can't handle carbs well. And if you'll stop eating so many carbs, you won't go too high and then you won't drop too low. And just have a nice talk. I remember going to a doctor. She wasn't an endocrinologist. That was probably my mistake because she didn't know too much. She took out a printed list with a bunch of questions and just started asking me question after question and kind of, marking them. But she really had very little to say that was helpful. But she did say one thing that was helpful. She said, well, maybe, because at that time I was eating vegetarian. She said, maybe you ought to eat a little more protein. So if you have a piece of bread, have some peanut butter on it, something like that. And that did help. Well, I can't go back to talk to the dentist of the year 2000. That's not possible. There are no time machines. But I can talk to you. I can tell you some things, and I can tell you if your blood sugar is bouncing all over the place, or maybe it's high all the time, then all you need to do is cut those carbohydrates and things will calm down in a hurry. And amazingly, so much of the time, your irritable bowel syndrome will go away, your frozen shoulders will go away, your constant infections will go away, your inflammation will go away, your arthritis pain will stop, and just on and on I could go. In some cases, people are suggesting that even cancer itself can be driven back and out of your life by cutting the sugar because they're saying that cancer feeds on sugar. I can't prove that, but I'm hearing that a lot these days. The question that so many people have about us is how in the world did you guys get to know each other? How did you get together? Well, the answer is found in Benedicta's new autobiography, When Destiny Calls. In fact, we do something in that autobiography that is almost never done. We each have a chapter sharing from our own perspective how we got together and how we first got to know each other. So she tells her side of it, I tell my side of it, and then it goes on with the rest of her autobiography. And the whole autobiography is exciting. It's a lot of drama and a lot of good stuff. But I think you'll find it interesting to know how it was that God brought us together. So there'll be a link in the description about how you can get this book on Amazon, either as an ebook or a paperback.